Some confessions are spoken because people want forgiveness, while others are spoken because the truth has remained hidden for far too long. Dr. Adriana Volkov understood that difference better than anyone, because the confession that changed her life was never about making a mistake. It was about explaining why she had trusted her instincts when everyone else believed she had made the wrong decision. For more than 12 years, Adriana had worked as a trauma surgeon at St. Gabriel Medical Center, where every shift brought new emergencies and difficult choices that could never be undone. Her colleagues often admired her calm personality because she never allowed panic to control her thinking, even when patients arrived with injuries so serious that every passing minute reduced their chances of survival. Although many people described her as fearless, Adriana quietly disagreed with that idea because she believed courage did not mean feeling no fear. True courage meant continuing to think clearly even when fear was standing beside you. That belief had guided her throughout her entire medical career. She followed the same morning routine every day because discipline helped her prepare for a profession where unexpected situations appeared without warning. Before sunrise, she drove through quiet streets, reviewed patient reports, while drinking a simple cup of black coffee, and reached the hospital long before her official shift began. Those peaceful moments allowed her to organize her thoughts before the busy corridors filled with worried families, rushing nurses, and emergency calls that demanded immediate attention. Working in a hospital had taught Adriana many lessons that no university could ever fully explain. Medical knowledge helped doctors understand the human body, but experience taught them something equally valuable. Patients were not only medical cases or laboratory results, because every person arriving through the emergency entrance carried dreams, responsibilities, and people waiting anxiously for them to return home. Remembering that simple truth helped Adriana treat every patient with patience and respect, no matter how busy the department became. On the other side of the city, 26-year-old Daniel Kovac was finishing another ordinary workday without realizing that his life was only minutes away from changing forever. He worked for a medical supply company, delivering equipment to small clinics and pharmacies across the city while attending engineering classes during the evenings. The work was not exciting, but it allowed him to support his widowed mother and his younger sister Sophia, who had recently started university with dreams of becoming an architect. As Daniel locked the back door of his delivery van, his phone vibrated inside his jacket pocket. Seeing Sophia's name immediately brought a smile to his face because she had inherited their mother's habit of calling several times a day for reasons that rarely seemed important. "Are you finally coming home on time?" she asked with playful frustration. Daniel laughed softly before leaning against the side of the van to avoid the cold wind that had begun sweeping through the parking lot. "I promised you dinner, didn't I? This time I actually plan to keep that promise." "You've said that before," Sophia replied, pretending not to believe him. "Mom has already made your favorite soup, and she's refusing to eat until you arrive." Daniel looked toward the dark clouds slowly gathering above the city before answering with quiet confidence. "Tell her not to wait much longer because I'll be home in less than 40 minutes. After ending the call, he stood silently for a few seconds while watching the first drops of rain fall onto the empty street. He briefly considered waiting until the weather improved, but another thought quickly entered his mind. His mother disliked eating dinner alone, and Sophia had an important university presentation the following morning. Missing another family meal felt more disappointing than driving carefully through the rain, So he fastened his helmet, started his motorcycle, and disappeared into the growing traffic. Life often changes during moments that appear completely ordinary. People naturally expect important events to arrive with loud warnings or dramatic signs, yet many life-changing experiences begin on afternoons that seem no different from countless others. Learning to appreciate ordinary moments is valuable because nobody truly knows which conversation, decision, or goodbye will become unforgettable later. At St. Gabriel Medical Center, the evening shift had just begun when the first emergency alert echoed through the trauma department. Heavy rain had reduced visibility on the highway, and several vehicles had collided after a large truck lost control while crossing a bridge outside the city. Within minutes, ambulances began reporting multiple serious injuries, forcing every available doctor and nurse to prepare for an unusually busy night. The peaceful atmosphere that had filled the hospital only minutes earlier disappeared almost instantly as medical teams moved quickly through the corridors, checking equipment and preparing emergency treatment rooms before the first patients arrived. Adriana quietly joined the trauma team without wasting a single second because she had experienced enough emergencies to understand that preparation often saved precious time once the doors opened. The first ambulance carried an elderly couple with broken bones but stable conditions. The second transported a young woman with a severe head injury who required immediate neurological care. Before either patient had completely disappeared into separate treatment rooms, another ambulance stopped outside the emergency entrance with flashing blue lights reflecting across the rain-covered pavement. Two paramedics pushed a stretcher through the automatic doors while speaking rapidly to the waiting doctors. Male patient, 26 years old, one of them reported while keeping pace beside the stretcher. Motorcycle accident with significant chest trauma, possible internal bleeding, rapidly falling blood pressure, and decreasing oxygen levels despite emergency treatment. Adriana stepped forward and looked carefully at the unconscious young man lying beneath the soaked emergency blankets. His face appeared surprisingly peaceful despite the visible injuries covering his body, and the identification bracelet attached to his wrist confirmed that his name was Daniel Kovac. Within moments, nurses connected him to several monitors, while another doctor reviewed the first trauma scan that had been completed inside the ambulance. Most members of the emergency team immediately focused on the obvious signs of internal bleeding because those injuries required urgent surgery, yet Adriana continued studying the images with unusual concentration instead of giving immediate instructions. The room gradually became quieter as she examined the scan for a second time. Years of experience had taught her never to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that appeared whenever medical evidence failed to match a patient's condition. Instinct alone could never replace scientific knowledge, but careful observation often revealed important details before machines or reports provided complete answers. Wise professionals respected both experience and evidence because neither one was truly complete without the other. Finally, Adriana looked up from the screen and spoke with calm certainty. "I want another chest scan before we move him to the operating room." Several doctors exchanged surprised glances because every additional minute increased the risk of losing the patient. One senior surgeon stepped closer and quietly shook his head before answering. "Adriana, we don't have time for another scan because he needs surgery immediately, and delaying the operation could cost him his life." Adriana met his eyes without raising her voice. "And if we operate without understanding everything that is happening inside his chest," she replied, "we may lose him before the surgery has any chance to save him." The room fell silent once again as every member of the trauma team waited to see who would make the next decision, because everyone understood that the next few minutes would determine far more than the future of one critically injured patient. They would also decide whether one respected surgeon continued to earn the trust she had spent 12 years building, or watched that reputation disappear in a single unforgettable night. Before I share the rest of the story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. For several long seconds, nobody inside the emergency room spoke another word, because every doctor understood the weight of Adriana's decision. The monitors continued producing their steady rhythm while rain beat heavily against the hospital windows, creating an uncomfortable silence that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. Although everyone respected Adriana's experience, they also knew that delaying surgery for a patient with severe internal bleeding could become a decision that no explanation would ever justify if the outcome turned tragic. The senior surgeon, Dr. Marcus Keller, stepped closer to the examination table and studied the scan himself before looking back at Adriana with visible concern. He had worked in trauma surgery for nearly 15 years, and his reputation had been built on making quick decisions during emergencies. In his opinion, every unnecessary delay created another opportunity for a patient to lose precious blood, and he believed hesitation could sometimes become more dangerous than acting with incomplete information. "We already know he has internal bleeding," Marcus said firmly. "Every minute we spend searching for another problem increases the risk of losing him." Adriana remained calm because she had expected resistance from at least one member of the team. She understood Marcus's concern, yet something continued to trouble her every time she compared Daniel's condition with the images displayed on the screen. The numbers were telling one story, but the patient himself seemed to be telling another, and that difference refused to disappear from her mind. "I agree that he needs surgery," Adriana replied in an even voice. "However, I don't believe internal bleeding is the only reason his condition is becoming unstable, and if we ignore that possibility, we may create a problem that no operation can solve." Dr. Viktor Mikhailov, the department director, had quietly entered the room while the discussion continued. Instead of interrupting, he carefully listened to both surgeons because leadership often required understanding different opinions before making an important decision. Hospitals depended on teamwork, but effective teamwork did not mean everyone agreed immediately. Respectful disagreement often revealed valuable ideas that would otherwise remain unnoticed. Victor finally looked toward Adriana. "How long will the second scan take?" "Less than 4 minutes." He nodded slowly before making his decision. "You have 4 minutes." Without wasting another second, the nurses prepared Daniel for another scan, while the trauma team remained ready to move him directly into surgery if Adriana's concerns proved incorrect. Nobody complained because every person in the room understood that arguing would only waste valuable time that the patient could not afford to lose. The scan finished exactly 3 minutes later. As the new images appeared on the large monitor, Adriana immediately stepped closer and carefully examined every section of Daniel's chest. The rest of the team waited silently behind her, searching her face for any sign that explained why she had insisted on delaying surgery. Then she found it. A thin collection of trapped air had expanded near Daniel's right lung, creating pressure that had not been visible during the first examination. The change was small enough to escape the attention of most doctors, yet Adriana immediately recognized the danger because she had treated a similar case several years earlier. "There it is," she whispered. Marcus moved beside her and stared at the same image for several seconds before his expression changed completely. "I didn't see that," he admitted quietly. "The pressure is increasing," Adriana explained. "If we place him under anesthesia without treating this first, his heart could stop before we even begin repairing the internal bleeding." Nobody questioned her decision after that. Within moments, the emergency team prepared the equipment needed to release the trapped air before moving Daniel into the operating room. The procedure lasted only a few minutes, but the results appeared almost immediately as his oxygen level improved and his blood pressure slowly became more stable. Several younger doctors looked at Adriana with quiet admiration because they had just witnessed an important lesson that no medical textbook could fully teach. Experience was valuable not because it made people feel more confident, but because it trained them to recognize small warning signs that others had not yet learned to notice. Careful observation rarely attracted attention when everything ended well, yet it often became the hidden reason behind successful outcomes. Daniel was transferred to the operating room without further delay. Bright surgical lights reflected across polished instruments while every member of the team prepared for the difficult operation ahead. Adriana completed her familiar routine before every surgery because repeated habits helped her remain focused even when the situation became emotionally overwhelming. Pilots, musicians, and surgeons all depended on disciplined preparation because calm routines often created clear thinking during moments of intense pressure. The operation began smoothly. The damaged liver matched the scan almost perfectly, allowing Adriana and her team to control the bleeding step by step. For nearly 50 minutes, every part of the procedure progressed exactly as expected, and even Marcus quietly admitted that Adriana's earlier decision had probably prevented a far more dangerous situation. Then another unexpected problem appeared. The heart monitor began showing an unusual rhythm that lasted only a few seconds before returning to normal. Most members of the team barely noticed the change because it disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. Yet Adriana immediately stopped what she was doing and asked the anesthesiologist to repeat every measurement. The request surprised several assistants because nothing on the monitors appeared critical anymore. "Everything looks stable," the anesthesiologist reported after checking the equipment. "It looks stable," Adriana answered, "but it doesn't feel stable." Instead of continuing the operation immediately, she reviewed every reading one more time until a single number finally caught her attention. The pressure inside Daniel's airway had increased gradually over the last several minutes, even though the ventilator itself appeared to be functioning normally. "Please confirm the position of the breathing tube," she requested. The anesthesiologist hesitated because the tube had already been checked before surgery began. "I confirmed it earlier." "I know," Adriana replied gently. "Please confirm it again." He carefully repeated the examination. Only a few seconds later, his face lost its color. "The tube has shifted." A quiet wave of shock spread across the operating room because nobody had expected such a small movement to create a potentially life-threatening complication. The breathing tube was immediately repositioned, and within moments, Daniel's heart rhythm returned to normal, while the monitor displayed steady numbers once again. Marcus looked across the operating table with genuine respect. "You noticed that before anyone else." Adriana smiled faintly without looking away from the patient. "I noticed that something didn't make sense, and sometimes that is enough to tell us where we should keep looking." The operation continued successfully for another hour, before the final stitch was placed, and Daniel was transferred safely to the intensive care unit. Every member of the team left the operating room believing the difficult night had finally come to an end, yet Adriana could not completely silence the strange feeling that had followed her since Daniel first arrived. As she removed her surgical gloves and prepared to leave the operating room, a young administrative officer approached with an unusually serious expression and handed Dr. Victor a sealed envelope marked Urgent Internal Review. Victor opened it immediately, read only the first page, and slowly lifted his eyes toward Adriana before speaking words that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the room. "Dr. Volkov," he said quietly, "someone has officially reported that your decision to delay surgery placed this patient in unnecessary danger, and the hospital has ordered an immediate investigation." The words inside the sealed envelope changed the atmosphere more quickly than any emergency alarm had earlier that evening. Only a few minutes before, every member of the surgical team had been quietly celebrating the successful operation that had saved Daniel's life. Now, those same people stood in complete silence as Dr. Victor carefully folded the document and looked toward Adriana with an expression that revealed both concern and disappointment. "The hospital administration has received a formal complaint," Victor explained. "According to this report, someone believes your decision to order a second scan and delay surgery placed the patient in unnecessary danger, and they are requesting a full investigation into your actions." Adriana accepted the news without arguing, because she understood that difficult decisions often attracted criticism before people fully understood them. Although she believed she had acted correctly, she also knew that confidence alone could never replace evidence. In medicine, every important decision had to be supported by facts rather than personal opinions, because patients deserved careful judgment instead of emotional reactions. The following morning, Adriana entered the hospital much earlier than usual, but the familiar corridors no longer felt welcoming. Conversations stopped whenever she walked past a group of employees, and several junior doctors quickly looked away after recognizing her. News traveled surprisingly fast inside hospitals, especially when respected professionals became the subject of an official investigation. Later that morning, Adriana joined Victor and 3 members of the hospital review committee inside a quiet conference room. Every medical report, scan, and operation record had already been placed neatly across the large wooden table, waiting to be examined once again. The committee explained that they intended to understand every decision made during Daniel's treatment, because their responsibility was not to punish anyone unfairly, but to protect both patients and medical standards. One committee member looked directly at Adriana before asking the first question. "Dr. Volkov, what made you request another scan when the first examination already confirmed severe internal bleeding?" Adriana answered without hesitation. "The patient's condition continued changing in ways that the first scan did not fully explain, and experience has taught me that when evidence and observation do not agree, doctors should continue looking until they understand why." The committee listened carefully while comparing her explanation with the medical reports. Another member spoke a few moments later. "The second scan identified trapped air around the lung, and your emergency procedure clearly improved the patient's condition before surgery." "Yes," Adriana replied. "Without that procedure, do you believe the patient would have survived the operation?" "I cannot promise any outcome with certainty," she answered honestly, "but I believe his chances would have been significantly lower." Honesty is often more powerful than certainty because honest people recognize the limits of their knowledge. Good professionals understand that confidence should never become arrogance, and admitting uncertainty when necessary is not a weakness. Instead, it shows respect for both the truth and the responsibility carried by difficult decisions. The meeting continued for almost 2 hours before one of the investigators requested access to the hospital security recordings covering the emergency entrance. Although the cameras had originally been reviewed only to confirm the timeline of Daniel's arrival, the committee wanted to verify every movement that occurred before surgery began. As the video played across the large screen, Adriana quietly watched the familiar images of paramedics rushing through the entrance, with Daniel lying unconscious on the stretcher. Everything appeared completely ordinary, until one investigator suddenly paused the recording and pointed toward a man wearing surgical clothing who briefly approached the patient before disappearing into another hallway. "Who is that?" he asked. Nobody answered immediately. Victor leaned closer to the screen before quietly recognizing the face. "That's Dr. Marcus Keller." Adriana looked surprised because Marcus had never mentioned seeing Daniel before the trauma team accepted responsibility for his treatment. The investigators immediately requested additional security footage from nearby corridors, and within minutes, they confirmed that Marcus had approached the patient alone before anyone else entered the examination room. When Marcus was questioned later that afternoon, he admitted that he had briefly examined Daniel after noticing the ambulance arrive. He insisted that he had only wanted to help because he believed every available surgeon should assist during a major emergency. His explanation sounded reasonable at first, yet the investigation uncovered another detail that nobody had expected. Hospital computer records showed that Daniel's electronic medical file had been opened using Marcus's identification badge before Adriana ever reviewed the case. The committee immediately requested the complete digital activity report. Modern hospitals record every important action inside their electronic systems because accurate records protect both patients and healthcare professionals. Technology cannot replace human judgment, but it can preserve information that might otherwise be forgotten, making careful documentation one of the strongest tools for discovering the truth. The report revealed that Marcus had entered preliminary treatment notes into Daniel's medical record before leaving the emergency department. Although his intention had been to speed up the admission process, one of those notes incorrectly suggested that surgery should begin immediately without additional imaging. Because the complaint filed against Adriana relied heavily on that incomplete documentation, the committee finally understood how the misunderstanding had developed. Marcus lowered his head after reading the final report. "I never wanted to harm anyone," he admitted quietly. "I believed delaying surgery would reduce the patient's chances, and after everything ended successfully, I still thought the protocol had been broken without good reason." Victor looked at him calmly before responding. "Protocols exist to guide doctors, but they cannot replace careful judgment when new evidence changes the situation." Several days later, the hospital officially closed the investigation after reviewing every scan, every report, and every minute of Daniel's treatment. The committee concluded that Adriana's decision to order another scan had directly identified a hidden chest injury that would almost certainly have become fatal during surgery. They also confirmed that requesting a second examination of the breathing tube had prevented another serious complication inside the operating room. Daniel continued recovering well, and 2 weeks later, he finally walked through the hospital corridors without assistance. Before leaving, he asked to meet the surgeon who had treated him on the night of the accident, because he wanted to thank the person who had refused to ignore the small warning signs that everyone else had overlooked. As Adriana wished him good health and watched him leave with his mother and younger sister, she realized that the investigation had taught her a lesson she would never forget. Her confession had never been about making the wrong decision. It was about admitting that, for a brief moment after the complaint was filed, she had almost stopped trusting the careful judgment that years of experience had patiently built. From that day forward, whenever young doctors asked Adriana for advice, she always gave the same answer. Never confuse confidence with certainty, and never ignore quiet evidence simply because louder voices are asking you to hurry. Patients trust us with their lives, and that trust deserves careful thinking before quick conclusions. Sometimes the greatest confession is not admitting that you failed. Sometimes it is admitting that you almost doubted yourself when the truth was quietly standing beside you all along. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.